You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So hi everyone, and welcome all to another episode of Changing Reality. So Changing Reality is a show from the WQHS Radio here at the University of Pennsylvania that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are in essence changing their own reality. So if this is your first time watching today's show, welcome, special welcome for you guys. But through this show, we'll be able to hang out and interview amazing people from social change makers, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, industry experts in a sense, to artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the globe. So by hearing these inspiring stories on how they started, where they began in a sense, and how their journey started from the more human perspective, hopefully we'll be able to pick out little tips and tricks for success that we can mirror in our own lives. And I wanted to do this show simply because I feel like there are a lot of people out there who do phenomenal things and make waves in the lives of those around them. And I'm super passionate about learning how these stories and how they actually got to where they are, beyond what we read about in the books, beyond what we normally have the privy to find out about. So through this show, we can hopefully uncover some personal stories that will change the way we look at our own lives. And to show you how much I believe in the power of stories, or how much the power of stories has changed my life as an individual, I actually personally founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance back at home in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, that collaborates with not only today our Malaysian Ministry of Education, but over 28 different countries to provide an alternative education platform for any student out there who wants to change their own reality. So we work with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, and projects that help them discover their passion, learn about themselves and the world around them, and start their own careers while they're still in school that has meaningful impact not just on themselves, but on those around them as well. And to date, we've been fortunate to work with over 35,000 students in 970 communities and have incubated countless number of student-run projects and social enterprises run by students aged 8 to 25 years old themselves. And the basis of all of this, the reason we could do all of that, is because of kind individuals out there who have achieved success and who are willing to share their stories as well, willing to share their time, their expertise, and shorten the learning curve of many others out there. And similarly, like that, I hope that this show, Changing Reality, is that same platform for all of you who are watching today's show. That through this show, you can pick up the things that you need to have a little bit more clarity, a little bit more inspiration in your own life. And that it'll springboard you to achieving the phenomenal things that you are meant to do. So if there's anything specific that you guys want to talk about, any experiences, any industries that you want to uncover, please let us know in the comments. You can drop more info about it down in the live chat, and we will try our best to take as many of your questions, as many of your suggestions as possible. Now, on to today's episode. Today's episode is a very, very special episode in a sense. We have with us an amazing professor who is a professor of marketing and behavioral science at the Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. So his main research areas are in the autonomous technology adoption from both consumer and production, with many of his current projects exploring the value of human labor in the age of AI. He's published numerous papers from advertising language, consumer identity, numerical cognition, and so much more, with his work having appeared in some top journals across the world, from the Management Science Journal, Natural Human Behavior, Journal of Consumer Research, and even the Journal of Marketing and the International Journal of Research in Marketing. And his work has not only been featured there, but also featured in media from across the world, from some of the most prestigious institutions, from the Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, The Times, the Wall Street Journal, and many more as well. At RSM, he is the director of the Psychology of AI Lab and the head of the Department of Marketing Management. And very soon there have been whispers that he may even be, I would say, a professor here at Wharton and would grace our campus too. So fingers crossed that we'd one day all get to meet him in person. But until then, without further ado, let's welcome our phenomenal speaker for today, Professor Puntoni.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Asha. Thank you for the very kind introduction.
Kind? I feel like you are one of those people which I didn't do justice enough. There's so many things that you've done, so much research, so much publications, that I think we need a whole show to cover that alone. But anyway, thank you for joining us on the show. It is amazing to have you here.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. And one of the things that I personally always love having people on the show who, as I mentioned in a spoiler, that there may have been whispers that maybe you'll be joining us on the Wharton campus soon, in a sense. I personally think that you would be an amazing addition. And I was just talking to you before the show that I'm sure you have numerous fans by then from today's episode pouring in for your classes and pouring in to listen to the things that you've done. But until then, in a sense, I thought this interview is an amazing opportunity for a lot of the students who, at the very least, could get familiar with your work and you, the amazing person behind the work. I started the show because I feel like there's so much value in conversations beyond what we could read about in our day-to-day academic lives, and that by hearing it from the source itself, there's so much value. So I'm curious, though, in a sense that you've done so many things. You've literally been a pioneer in many of your fields of research. AI, you started researching about this. You started, I would say, publishing papers on this long before it became a buzzword that it is today. And you've been ahead of the curve in that sense, in a way. So I'm so curious to know, how did you actually come to this industry? How did you actually decide that this was the field for you? Was it something that you'd known as a kid, that you had a huge grand plan that you were going to change the world using consumer behavior? Or how was it like when you first, I would say, were a student in school? Did you know that this was something that you're going to do or that you were passionate about?
I had completely no clue. And I think that's true probably for a lot of people. First thing I like to say that it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to learn more about the Penn student community, and I do indeed, like you said, hope to have more opportunities in the near future to get to know better this amazing community and this amazing group of students. So I hope there will be more news coming soon on this. But in terms of like how I got to be a professor, I think that probably true for a lot of people, certainly in academia, but I think it's true probably in every field. Sometimes when you meet at a conference with colleagues and you sit around a table for dinner, you get around and say, how do you get into this? Like it's not, it's a niche thing. It's also business studies at an academic level is maybe not what you tend to associate usually with academia as much. It's a bit more practical, right? And so it's interesting to hear the stories, and everybody has an odd story, So most people come to where they are in roundabout ways, and I think to some extent, I learning from this for students is that you can't plan too much. I think you need to know your strength. You need to know what you enjoy. You need to know what impact you care to make in the world, but how exactly you're going to do that, you'll figure it out. Opportunities will come out, and I think it's very hard. There are some people always wanted to be a doctor. Okay, so day one, they worked their life. They did it. It's great. But I think this is actually a relative minority of people. I don't think most people are like that. So for me, I actually, finishing high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I liked architecture very much. So I had a good art history teacher and was spending a lot of time telling us about architecture. I found that field really fascinating. And so that was what I thought I would like to do. But I'm not so young. So at the time,
you're not professor of architecture now. That's a bit of a jump from architecture to AI. Okay, never mind.
There is a thread. You'll see that things are impossible to anticipate, but they're not random in a way. So there is a pattern. So I thought, okay, architecture is a good thing, but at the time, you still was this impression that you needed to be good at drawing. You need to do, hand drawing for architecture. You started getting computers and computer-aided design. Things were changing, but still there was this idea if you are bad with your hands, let's say, if you don't have good drawing skills, it doesn't sound like a good career option. And I had awful, dreadful drawing skills. So my teacher said, "Yeah, I like that you like it, but I have to tell you, no, I don't think you can do this." So I said, "Okay, what do I do then?" And then I started exploring a lot of different topics, and I found that many things interesting. I mean, at some point I was thinking of studying history, and then at some point I wanted to do philosophy. Then at some point I wanted to do astronomy, and then the big divide was really between the sciences and the humanities, because I liked both, and I didn't know really what path would be best. And then I thought, if I'm studying the sciences, I might be able to pursue, cultivate an interest in humanities in my spare time. And if I pursue the humanities, I'm unlikely to be cultivating the sciences, just because the entry barrier is so much higher, so much harder work in some way to get to a minimal understanding. So I thought, you know what, I think I'm better off doing something more on the scientific side. And then I was looking at what to do, and I didn't know, but I was fascinated by the social sciences, and I thought, what could be scientific around the social sciences? And I figured that one thing that could be good would be to study statistics. So, you have data everywhere, and obviously this is especially true today, but it was already true back in the in the 90s when I was studying at university. And so I thought, okay, let's do statistics. Did that for basically 5 years of up to kind of graduate level. And then while being there, I really enjoyed the academic environment. I liked the intellectual vibrancy, the smart people you meet there, the pushing the boundary of what we know. It sounded exciting. You find something that you want and you want to study more, and you are free to really pursue that interest. I like the freedom and combined with also an institutional environment that is very well defined. It seemed like safe and exciting at the same time. So I thought, okay, I like to be an academic. And at the time, I grew up in Italy, and I hardly spoke any English. And I thought, okay, but I would like to study abroad. So I was looking for options, and I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I wanted to study something in the broad area around business and social sciences. And with statistics, you can do a lot of different things. So there was a lot of freedom what to do. And in the last year of the degree, you could pick different specializations. And normally you take one and you do something like 5 or 6 electives in that specialization. And it might be something like national statistics, how do you calculate inflation rates or whatever. Or it could be something more to do with epidemiology. There was one in medicine. There was one in operations research and optimization. There was one in demography. So population.
Quite a range of stuff. Okay.
So very, very different kind of things. And I didn't know, and there was one in businesses. And I didn't know what I wanted to do still. So I thought, you know what, instead of taking one specialization, I take one course from every specialization. So it made absolute no sense. It was completely stupid package of topics that didn't fit together, didn't amount to some kind of a competence set that you could market to an employer. It was really a bit stupid in that sense. But I thought I need to learn what I want, because if I don't know what I want, how can I get it? So I thought by being exposed to such broad set of topics, perhaps I do find what I like. And I did take a market research course, and I found that really exciting to learn about consumer preferences, how people make decisions. And I thought, oh yeah, that I really like. It's like a mundane decisions, like you make decisions countless times every day, whether it is from the most menial supermarket items to whatever you consume when you're out in the street or whatever. So we make those buying decisions all the time, but we also make important decisions that really define our life, the houses we buy, and big decisions. How do we make financial decisions to plan for our retirement or whatever? So there are high stake and low stake. Everybody has to make a lot of these decisions all the time. So it seemed important, and so I liked it, and I thought, okay, that's what I'm gonna study. The strange thing then is, I think, a learning for students maybe that sometimes it is worth just engaging in some experiences for the sake of learning better your preferences. You may have very well-defined preferences, but many people don't. And so it's sometimes useful just to do something in order to know what you want. And based on that insight, you might be able to make better and more confident decisions down the line. So sometimes I think it's worth investing a little bit of your time and energy budget just to expose yourself to different kind of situations so that you can ideally learn about your utility function, basically, what it is that drives you in your interest and the motivation and so forth. So at that point, I ended up deciding, okay, I do a PhD in marketing, and I became then a student at London Business School. So I moved to the UK. And then after
the best business school, but I want to go there in a sense. Okay,
it's a good business school. It was again weird thing, meaning I thought the applications were early in the year, but I was late because my graduation session was only in March. So I thought, okay, I have a long time. I already bought a backpack. I was going to travel to Mexico for 6 months. That was my plan. And then London Business School, I hadn't found anyone, and they got permission to extend the deadline. So I just got in touch and say, hey, can you, could I apply? And say, yeah, but you're very late, so apply right away. And they told me, you have to do this standardized test, and you're probably familiar with some of these, like the GMAT, and I said, okay, yeah, no worries. I was a bit cocky, kind of, cum laude student in statistics or this kind of business stuff. Yeah, and I did one of these without preparing, and I got a terrible score. It was awful. Bad. So basically, it took 2 weeks, and I really, studied night and day, and then the score got a lot better. That's again a learning that a lot of things that we assume are meant to be indicators of innate performance, so some kind of like stable quality, in fact, are learned. So that means that if there are things that you struggle with, you might be able to actually do a lot to improve your standing on that item. If it's something that matters to you, you can make it better. I think self-improvement, there's enormous potential for that in almost everything. I mean, almost everything. You cannot get taller by just wishing it or whatever. There are things that you cannot change, but a lot of things you can. So then after the PhD, I became a professor here in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and we've been here ever since. And at the beginning of my career, I was investigating mostly questions related to globalization. So I was, in Italian, lived in the UK, I was now in the Netherlands. My wife is Swedish, so we had this international family. And I got interested in consumer cognitions kind of topic that related to language, for example. How do you process language in messages that you might appear in advertising when they are in your native language, your foreign language? We're interested in the notion of identity, how your identity shapes the way that you look at the world. And I did that for about 10 years. And I became full professor here. And at the time when you do that, in the Netherlands, they have this tradition where new professors they call it inaugurated. So you are inaugurated as a professor. For the first time, you're allowed to wear a toga, this kind of like medieval sort of, attire. And you give a public lecture to all the professors in the university. So you're basically there in this hall, and you give this speech in a very formal setting. And typically what people do is that they reflect on what they've done to get to that level. And it served a bit like closure. I had the opportunity to then put together and tell a story about what I had been doing the previous 10 years. And then I thought, okay, what now? And at that time, machine learning was starting to deliver the first very big breakthroughs, like self-driving cars. Siri was, in the making and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, I was interested to this because in my previous studies, I had done a little bit of, in some exams, we covered things like, neural networks. And I was interested in seeing what this technology was now able to do. And at the same time, was also interested from a professional point of view of how this was going to change the way the consumers make decisions. And even from a personal point of view, as a parent, I was thinking about what kind of skills do my children need in order to be successful in tomorrow's world, because of course the world is changing fast. Machines are able to do more and more, and what is it that we will be focusing on, and what do we need to equip them so that they can be successful? So I was thinking about these things, and I thought, you know what, why don't I just start a research stream on this? There was nobody doing work at the boundary between data science and behavioral science at that time, and I thought, okay, there's a lot of interesting questions, and that's what I've been doing for the past 8 years. And it's been, it's been a good ride. I've been enjoying it. And I think naturally, when you get into this kind of area, there's so many questions that there's basically no shortage of new projects or ideas. And I've been quite busy ever since.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that I was very fascinated when I first started reading a little bit of the papers and the articles that you publish online was that intersection, in a sense, between the people element that often people forget about when they talk about AI and data and all of these things, in a sense. And one of the things that recently I've had the fortune to speak to a couple of PhD students who are very early in the journey, probably in their first semester. And they always have a bit of an issue in kind of picking a topic or something that they want to research about that they feel that they can really flesh out and that they're passionate about. for you, in a sense, it seems that you bring together kind of like what you see around the world with your own personal experiences, and you seem to merge the two in a sense. Was that something that comes naturally to you, or is it something that you had to crack your head over trying to figure out what do I do next, in a sense?
Actually, yeah, I tend to find research questions in the world around me. So I don't normally derive research ideas from reading other papers. Sometimes I do, but most of the times it's just by observing something in the real world, maybe something in my own life, maybe something that I see people writing about in the media that strikes me interesting, important. And I'm a marketing professor. I'm a behavioral scientist investigating consumer decision making. So I'm basically an applied, the way that I see myself, an applied researcher. I want to study things that happen in the real world. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an economist in that sense. So I think finding ideas in the real world is important, because then you are more confident that the idea is actually important, because you can see that it's a concern for some people. If you see a phenomenon you observe, you are more confident that the phenomenon actually exists, because you already are able to somehow observe some of its manifestations. And it is easier to persuade readers, for example, journal editors, that we should be studying this. So I think there's a lot of benefits from seeing things out there and trying to study them, rather than sitting in the lab and come up with some hypotheses that may or may not bear on what people actually do in the real world.
No, very true. And I find it interesting in your journey how you shared in the initial stages that you yourself were not so sure what to do in your own career. And then today you're someone who, as I said, pioneered this whole, or was one of the very early people in this phases of research. On the flip side, now you are a professor. I'm sure you have students who are even more confused and not uncertain of what to pursue, that you have met and you had to teach, in a sense. Have you ever encountered students like this, or do they still exist, or are we the outliers, me and my friends? So how do you actually guide them towards finding things that suit them, in a sense, or helping them kind of discover what their passion is or what field they should take?
I think a lot of students today should relax a bit. I think there's a lot of students who are very stressed. I think the expectations are very high, and I think the danger of of being so worried about not achieving your potential or about negative outcomes is that you actually make those bad events you want to avoid more likely to actually occur. So I think if you want to be a successful student, I think you want to be displaying a passion for learning. So having intrinsic motivation, you should be there because it's a life-changing experience for the people you meet, things you learn, experiences you have. And take advantage of that and not be too worried about having to pad out maximally your CV, or having to go to every recruiting event and make sure that you are networking with everybody that you possibly can meet. Do the things that you think are giving you meaning and pleasure, and obviously work hard, but do it in a way that gives you energy, not that takes it away. And I think I see too many students that struggle a little bit with that. I think COVID hasn't helped. I think has been creating massive, mental health problems for a lot of people, and maybe students especially, because I think especially in the age group between, say, 15 and 23, this is the time when you are supposed to go out, you're supposed to meet people, you're supposed to be experiencing the world, and you grow that way. And now, living in a, basically your world being constrained to a laptop and a bedroom, I don't think that it's ideal. But I think now, hopefully, I'm hoping that we are slightly moving towards the tail of the pandemic, that people can get out and maybe catch up some of the things that they missed. So travel, meet people in face to face, do things with their hands, and get involved in projects. And I think things like that would probably provide a lot of inspiration to a lot of people, like they have for people before. So I would say my recommendation for students is like intrinsic motivation. What is it that drives you? Don't make it only about extrinsic motivation, the salary of the job, the line on the CV, the likes on your social media accounts. Those are not the right parameters on which to optimize your decision making, I would say.
Okay, that is a very sound piece of advice. I myself am guilty of staying at home for the last 2 years, and now hiss every time I see the sunlight. So definitely advice that I have to take for myself in a way. Tell me a little bit about maybe some of the initial work you did in your first few research projects, in a sense. Were you always the kind of researcher who had that intrinsic motivation to see it to the end? Or did you, even prior to the pandemic, suffer from bouts of burnout or demotivation at times in a sense, and how did you pull yourself through? Because research is something that people look at like, oh, you wrote a paper, it seems very easy, but there's so much work that goes inside it in a sense that is unfathomable to people who have not gone through that experience that you did. So how did you basically ensure that intrinsic motivation lasts towards the end in a way?
I think I was lucky in the first years of my career. I was in an environment where pressure was relatively low, meaning that I was able to dedicate the time I felt I needed to dedicate to making progress, while at the same time being able to also maintain a healthy work-life balance. I had the small children at the time. I actually had this profession has a lot of advantages, but it has a couple of disadvantages. And one of them is that you basically, before you're ready to start working as a professor, you have to go through a very long training, right? Because you go through your graduate and then you have your PhD. And so you are basically close to hitting 30 by the time you start working almost. I think I was 29. And then the first few years of your career, you don't have a lot of stability yet because you have this tenure track system, or this system, or they call it publish or perish, where basically you are in a situation where your future position and advancement in your career depends almost entirely on your ability to produce output. And that is mostly articles in academic journals, and obviously also your teaching in the classroom. And for a lot of people, that's a very stressful time. And so you end up now only by the time of the end of the tenure, which might be taking several years, divided a bit by institution. But you might be now in your mid-30s, and you can kind of like have a bit more stability and be more comfortable with the place you are. I didn't really have that. I felt very relaxed from day one, and in fact, I had a great time during my tenure track. I was able to do a lot of research, study things I found interesting, learn a lot in the process. Clearly, when you finish your PhD, you're not quite ready. There's a lot of maturation still has to happen in terms of as an author, as a writer, as a researcher, to learn the ropes. But one first project that I worked on, I think, just as an example of how you get ideas from the real world. I mentioned already this idea of language, native or foreign. So I had a project that was initiated when I was already still a PhD student, or at least the seed of the idea was initiated when I was a PhD student in London. And I had friends from all over the world, and some were also Italian. So I would interact with them in Italian. But then in a group with other people, we would interact in English because it would be people who didn't speak Italian around. And I noticed in a couple of them quite stark phenomenon where they would be rather polite when speaking in Italian, but they would swear a lot, use a lot of swear words when they were talking in English. And I found that interesting, that it was apparently easier to use swear words in a foreign language than it was in the native language. So that became a little bit of a dinner table conversation. When we have a dinner party with friends, I would bring it up sometime and say, hey, do you find it's easier to say beep in English than it is in your native language? Almost everybody agreed. And so when I came to the Netherlands, I thought, okay, what am I going to do now? My PhD was wrapped up. I was looking for new projects. And I thought, if you look around here, the native language of consumers is Dutch. And of course, everybody here speaks English. But half of the advertising is in English. So there's a lot of advertising messages in English for Dutch consumers. So maybe it's interesting to study how the use of the foreign language impacts their emotional reactions to advertising stimuli. And so this is an example of how a dinner table conversation turned into an academic project and something on advertising, and very different from the swear words hypothesis I started out with, but the psychological process was basically the same.
I love that example. It's such a good example, my goodness. And that is actually a very good example of how sometimes we see things in the day-to-day life that can evolve into something that has much more profound, I would say, research behind it, and a lot of, I would say, discovery behind it. That's a very interesting example. Actually, I never thought of it that way. I'm going to go and talk to all my bilingual friends and then get from them the truth now that you've mentioned it. It's going to be my dinner table conversation for at least a couple of weeks. And on that note, in a sense, since a lot of kind of the work that you do is rooted from your own experiences, I'm assuming that the work that you produce on the flip side of kind of like the papers and all are also, I would say, very practical and experiential in a sense. And I noticed that you wrote one article, I think, on AI in a experiential point of view. I think I'm not sure when exactly, and I was reading that. It's very fascinating. It also made me very curious because I noticed that one of the things that when I was reading up about you is that you said that you also consult a little bit for companies on marketing strategy. What has your experience been in kind of like going out there to these people who have been in the company in a sense, or in business in a sense, using these marketing strategies and bringing to them new input and new research? Have they always been receptive? I know some people are extremely receptive to new ideas, while others maybe are much less so in a sense. So in your experience, how has it been communicating the research that you've had and kind of like the insight that you've gotten to others out there who would be able to apply it in their own businesses?
Well, one reason why I've been excited about this new line of work at the boundary between data and behavioral science has been precisely because it helps marrying more applied work with companies with academic research and even teaching. So in my, let's say, previous line of focus, I was doing work on consumer decision making, and most of my teaching were in the area of brand strategy. So when I interacted with companies around consulting or training or other assignments of that kind, was mostly at the level of brand strategy and brand management. And so it was mostly focused on what I was doing in my teaching activities. And there was it felt sometimes a very stark separation between my life as a researcher and my life as a teacher. I was sometimes bringing in my research insights into the classroom, but not so often actually. And then not, if there would be more a side angle to the main issue, of the session. And I never particularly liked that. I think, it's normal that as an academic, you wear multiple hats, right? You have a manager, administrator hat, you have a teacher hat, you have a consulting hat, and a researcher, whatever. So we do play different roles, but ideally you would like those roles to have strong synergies so that you can build across the line of work. And that was often not really feeling like that very much. But the advantage of the work I've been doing in the last few years around data science and behavioral science is that it's aligning all of those directions much more closely. So I find that companies are very much interested in engaging with my research and my ideas. That in my classroom, I can talk much more about my research than I used to do. So in a way, I found one thing I like about it is that in my professional life, I'm finding now this greater focus and alignment that feels more like it's one career rather than three different careers. So yeah, I think companies do struggle to find ways of using data well and deploying algorithms in customer-facing functions. And so if you talk to companies about data science projects, you'll soon figure it out that data science projects, they're very rarely failing for technical reasons. Now, sometimes there might be problems of data availability, but usually it's not the technical issues. What makes projects not deliver is a human side. The human users who do not adopt the product or the solution, the employees who are not on board with the idea and might actively try to sometimes even sabotage projects, or people might be fearing being replaced by algorithms, and they are uncertain about the situation and their position in the company, and so forth. There are many reasons why people might have concerns. Change is always difficult anyway, and change of this nature is even more difficult. So it's understandable. And I think it's important when you want to invest in analytics that you pay enough attention to understanding those human factors too, that you don't simply focus all your attention on the technical aspects and make sure that those are perfect, but then forget about the fact that unless people actually use these things, it's pointless. I think that there is a lot of gain to be achieved by complementing a data science focus with a behavioral science perspective. I think it can enrich a lot, increase project success. It can provide deep insights about the value of these solutions, even improve the way that they are delivering results. I think there's a lot of benefits for companies, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area still. We don't know so much.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that you have seemed to have married your interest for the humanities with your sciences in kind of like this intersection of where you are right now, in a sense that you mentioned earlier, because the work that you do there. Yeah, like
I find it nice that you bring that up, because if you think, I started out telling you I wanted to be an architect and I wanted to combine the humanities and the sciences, and at the time I wasn't really I didn't quite understand myself well enough to have that insight. But the reason why I liked architecture was precisely the fact that architecture marries the two, because when you build a building, the design of the building has to be structurally sound. It has to be, from an engineering and the design point of view, it has to be done properly. So there is certainly a technical and scientific side to the architecture. At the same time, that's not enough. You need to have buildings that are beautiful, they stand out, they fulfill their goal, they serve the humans who are going to inhabit those buildings. So there's a lot of humanistic insights also in architecture. I think it was a combination of the two that was driving me to that field. Now, only a few years ago, in fact, I think about 5 years ago or so, I realized that the reason why I liked marketing as a field of specialization was actually the same. Because if you think about marketing is driven by data. There's a lot of data about customer preferences, and I came from statistics, right? So it's analytics is everything in marketing, and Wharton is basically leading that pack, that field. At the same time, marketing is about standing out. It's about creativity. It's about doing something different. It's about enticing people. So there's a lot of also the more creative side, and you have a left side and a right side of the brain, as old metaphor. And I think marketing is one of the few disciplines I know where you nurture both. You need to be both analytical and creative. And I think that's why I 5 years down the line, I found that I like to specialize in marketing, because I think it has the same reason why I wanted to be an architect, actually. Although the fields are completely different, they both share this blend of soft and hard. You see what I mean?
That is amazing. But I'm so curious, how do you think your life would have turned out if you had been good at drawing? Because I feel like that's one of the issues that people face, is that they like something at very early on, not because of the field itself, but because of reasons like that they see the synergy between two aspects of themselves that they want, in a sense. But that might not be the exact thing that is their fit, in a sense. So do you think you would have come to this research had you have been good at drawing and pursued and tried architecture as a kid, or
Yeah, probably not. But you can do you can engage in counterfactual and think, what if? And I think you can think about life as a decision tree, where you have branches and they separate out based on the decision that you make, the people that you meet, and the situation that you're finding yourself in. And it's important to realize that while some branches of that tree might be more desirable than other branches of that tree, for a given individual, there are many good branches that are available. So I'm happy where I am now. I enjoy what I'm doing. I wouldn't want to do anything else. But I am quite sure, too, that if I had made different choices in the past, I'd probably be saying the same. So, you see what I mean? That there are many good futures, and I don't think we need to over obsessed about playing out counterfaction. What if I'd done that? Yeah, it would have been different. And sometimes there are bad outcomes. Right? So you might end up in a situation where you're quite unhappy about the choices that you made, and that's of course unfortunate. The important thing is that you look forward, not backward, and say, okay, if I'm not happy where I am, what am I going to do in order to be happier in the future, rather than ruminate and regret things that you can no longer change. But in general, I think it's important to realize there are many good outcomes. I mean, Harsha 5 years from now could be in a million different places, but I'm sure that they will be good, whatever it is. So you'll find a path and will be a good one. I'm quite sure. So I think with a bit of talent and a lot of dedication, I think you of course, takes a little bit of luck too. So not everybody's lucky, but generally, I think there are many good things that you can do in life. You tend to say, okay, I do this and I could only have done this in my life. Maybe it's true for some people. I think for a lot of people, there is probably a set of competences and things that are important to them. And there are maybe, 15 different jobs that have a similar kind of blend of those, parameters, which would enable you to be satisfied and successful. So, could have been a different me.
Yeah. Very, very well said. And I think it's a very nice philosophy for all decision making in a sense, which is that there are multiple good outcomes in a sense. Which again, when it's a very interesting perspective, and interesting that you brought this up because you are very heavily in the field of AI and kind of like machine learning in a sense, which is always trying to find the best, and I would say kind of like the most targeted ads or the best employee, and they pour in a lot of this data to find that optimal answer in a sense. And at the same time, that itself, that process itself, I feel, leaves the human touch of things behind in a way. From your point of view, we have in kind of like with the recent, I would say, increase of all of the data that's been available and accessible, and the recent craze of people looking to the data in a way, do you feel like that there has been specific points where I would say the human aspect has been lost, and what do you think is the most, I would say, I wouldn't say problematic, but what do you think is the biggest issue or the biggest loss that we've had in humanity with the increase of
I think that's a big question. You can talk about a lot of different things. And before I give you my answer, I want to have a premise. And the premise is that while it is important that we focus on the bad, because we can do something to make it better, I think we should always strive to improve things. It is also important to realize that we've never had it as good as today. Today we've never had it as good, and tomorrow will be the same, and so forth. We've had amazing progress in a lot of different areas of life, and the human indicators are speaking that too. Although, of course, sometimes you have some hiccups, and it's not always a linear process. But generally speaking, I think we live in the best time that ever existed for humankind. So I think that's great, and you should just treasure the luck that we all have to be alive today. And I think it's a bit sad that so many people are so worried about a lot of things. Everything seems to be a disaster. Maybe, I think the media are playing a role with that, and social media in particular. But there's a lot of complaining, a lot of concerns, and those concerns are, rooted in important facts, whether that is climate change or, let's say, the war in Ukraine. There's a lot of things that should make us worry, but it's also important to realize that this is better than we have had it. There would be a lot of other things before. You don't have to go very far back in time to see situations that were, by today's standards, just appalling in many ways. Okay, that's the premise. Let me give the answer now. And the answer is that I think one big concern that I have is that AI, when it comes to, so you think about what kind of impact AI is having on society, the answer is many. AI and machine learning in particular is having impact in almost every domain and every area of human activity. So this is true across the board. One area where I think it's having the biggest impact on society overall is probably the internet, and in particular social media, and let's say the power of recommender systems broadly defined. So these are algorithms that based on your past behavior, and remember, everything you do online is in a database, right? So you're completely tracked and monitored. There are, incredibly detailed digital footprints that you leave behind that can be used by algorithms to make predictions about the future. Because AI, in the end, is a prediction algorithm. AI makes predictions about the future, and makes prediction based on past behavior. One issue is that the business model that has been adopted by the companies that have been let's say, driving the development of the social internet, whether that is Google or Facebook or companies like that, has been an advertising-driven business model. So they have been mostly essentially monetizing eyeballs. You want to basically attract an audience, you want to keep an audience. So the algorithms are optimized for that purpose. So whether it is the newsfeed algorithm of Facebook that is designing posts for you to see, or the photos that are streaming on your Instagram feed, or whatever, the next video recommendation on YouTube, or you name it. They're all designed to keep you there. The problem that I have is that the algorithm is never asking you what kind of person you want to be. What kind of human is important for you that you become. And so it's basically algorithms that are entirely optimizing on short-term urges and desires. So the algorithm is keeping you here now by showing you cat videos or whatever it is that is capturing your attention. But by doing so, you may actually make it harder for the person to achieve the goals that you want to achieve in the long run. Maybe you want to be a great swimmer, or you want to be a great musician, or an engineer, or another million things that require time and attention, and you spending days watching cat videos is not going to make it any easier for you to achieve those goals. So what I wish was for an internet where the optimization criteria of the algorithms were different from maybe those that we have today. And instead of trying to optimize, making predictions about what this person will want to watch now, we'll keep into consideration what kind of person this person wants to be in the future, and try to help you achieve your long-term goals rather than only optimizing your short-term desires and urges. Because I think this is a massive, I mean, we are basically, this is, I think, is a concern, especially for young people that consume so much media content through these channels dominated by advertising business models, is that you basically have to struggle even more to achieve your long-term goals, because it's like you have someone who's pulling you. You have like an angler reeling you in with the algorithm making predictions, saying, no, I want to get there, I want to study for that exam, I want to practice for this or whatever. And yet another hour is gone down the bin, down the drain, because you've been now watching the end YouTube video on this topic that you really could have done without. But it's difficult to resist those short-term urges, and the algorithms are perfectly designed to understand how, or to make predictions about how do you, keep people in today, and make them forget about the fact that there is a future.
But this is a very, very fascinating point in a sense. I'm a big believer in you are what you eat, but not necessarily in that space, but in you are what you consume, which includes the media you consume in a sense, the information that you're getting in a sense. I feel like to a large extent that programs the way you think, that programs the way you as an individual behave, respond, and all of that. And as someone who works with a lot of teenagers who spend a lot of time on the internet, I can agree that sometimes it's just, even if you're trying to get out of an emotional funk, or whether you're trying to get into the momentum of working towards something in a sense, it requires a completely different profile of media for you to consume that is not maybe necessarily the media you're consuming now in order to make
it's very hard to do, right? I mean, if you are bringing to self-control fight with the YouTube algorithm, it's like you're showing up with a knife and the algorithm shows up with a bazooka. It's hard to win.
yeah. But that is a very interesting, and I think we should, like as you said, looking forward and not looking back. I think we should look forward for the day where we did this same weakness in kind of those algorithms can be turned the other way, in a sense where we could actually program what we want, like how, as you said, the long-term goals that we want to achieve, the people that we want to be, in a sense, and have a media, I would say, circulation that we can consume that brings us forward instead of drags us back. And
I think
hopefully
we need the regulation. We need better consumer insights too, the consumer themselves. So you don't hear a lot of complaining about the Netflix algorithm being so good at understanding what people want to watch, and that being bad for people, right? Why? Because people pay for Netflix. Netflix objective is to serve you things that make you happier in the long run, because if you stop paying for the subscription, they lost a customer. And at the same time, it's a media consumption. You watch Netflix when you decide you want to watch something. It's not on your phone constantly running and telling you, calling for your attention. But you hear a lot of complaints about the Facebook algorithm, the YouTube algorithm. Why? Because of the business model. I think a combination of maturing of the internet and maybe regulation should help us align better our day-to-day behavior with our long-term goals. I think basically I think sometimes getting things for free has not been a blessing, actually. I understand that people say it's great that we can use the social media platform for free, but I think there are important repercussions to that, which may be actually quite undesirable for a lot of people. Some applications that I use for free, imagine Google Maps, with the recommendations with news for restaurants or shops that you might visit nearby. I can see there a great fit of a free usage model and advertising-based business, which can provide a lot of service and value. But when it comes to media consumption and time consuming things, I think that's a different story.
Amazing. That's a very, very good point that I will have to digest, and hopefully we come up with a solution to that soon, and a middle ground soon, in a sense. But no, that's a very, very good point. I'm very glad you shared that. On the flip side, in a sense, you have done so much, I would say, delving deep into this whole industry and this whole intersection between the way people work and the way AI works, in a sense. In all of your research, what has been I would say, the research that you've done that's been the most impactful to you, or the most impactful that you've seen as it's gone out and touched people's lives?
I don't know about impact, but one, I mean, I can mention two quickly. One you already mentioned was this research on trying to understand, taking an experiential view on AI. The question we were asking is a simple one, but I think a very fascinating one. What kind of experiences do people have with AI? Okay, AI can perform particular tasks. You have different types of algorithms. But what experience do you have from the other side as a user? What is the experience of interacting with AI? I find that really interesting, and it can provide a lot of insight for companies about how to design good customer experiences. Right? If you rely more and more on AI in your products and solutions, then understanding what consumers' experiences there are with that, then I think it can help you design better products and services. So that's basically one line of research. One that I also find interesting. I'm interested in the psychology of human replacement, meaning how does it feel to be replaced by a machine? And I studied that both in the consumer domain and in the let's say work domain. And in the consumer domain, I had a paper where we're looking at identity-based consumption. We do a lot of things in our life, not only because we want to get a job done, a means to an end, but also because doing those things is what a person like us should be doing. It defines us as a person. So if you are really into tennis, playing tennis seems to be quite an important thing to do. If you like to claim the badge, I'm really into tennis. See what I mean? So a lot of our behavior is driven not only by the consumption outcome, but also by the process of engaging in those activities and the value that they provide to you as a person. So it's not only about the destination, it's also about the journey, And what we find is that when people consume, partly because this is the person they want to be, then automation can be a challenge because it can reduce your experience of being that kind of person. If you're outsourcing a lot of important tasks to an algorithm or to a machine, then all of a sudden it's difficult for you to claim that you're actually doing the job, whether it is the cooking or the baking or the fishing or whatever, any activity that you might have as a hobby or as an interest. And so it's important for companies that roll out automation innovations to understand how those innovations fit into consumers' experience of being that kind of person. So that's in the consumer domain. In the case of work, we have a paper that makes an interesting point, I find, which is that it feels different where you're replaced at work by a human or a machine.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So let me make you. To explain the effect, I can put you in the experience like if you were a participant in one of our experiments. So imagine I make you read a story about a company that they need to cut down cost, and they have two options. They can either replace people with people, meaning they outsource to an external supplier, or they can replace people with robots, so they can automate production. And then you have nothing to do with the company. You're not working there. You're just an observer. But for some reason, they ask you to make that choice for the company. So what would you think that the majority of the people say when asked that question? Would you rather have those jobs go to people or go to robots? What do you think that most people say?
This is a real tricky one.
Just your feeling, there's no right or wrong question. What do you think?
I would say from a company point of view, I'd say
you're an observer. You're not a company.
I'm not the company. I'm the person.
You're just an observer.
People. I'd say people because you stimulate the economy, you provide jobs, right?
So most people say, if I get to pick and everything is the same, then give the jobs to people. Okay, so that's what about 2/3 of people tend to tell us. There is a second experiment, a condition in the same experiment, where we give them exactly the same story, but now it's not any company. Now it's your company. And it's not any job. Now it's your job. For some strange reason, you get to pick who is going to replace you. You get fired, and you have to choose whether you want to be replaced by a robot or by another person. What do you think that most people prefer?
This is very tough. I would like to pick a robot just so that I don't feel terrible that someone else replaced me.
Most people now say, it's all very well. When other people's jobs are going, I want people to get those jobs. But if it's my job, I like to give it to a robot. And yeah, so people have a short-term psychological incentive to prefer robotic replacement because it's less self-threatening. you don't feel, you don't compare yourself to robots as much as you compare yourself to other people. So it doesn't hurt as much psychologically to be replaced by a robot as it hurts to be replaced by a person. These are some examples of the stuff that was done in the last few years.
You just proved the hypothesis out there with me, because I definitely fell into that. But oh gosh, that is that is insane to think about. As we wind down our conversation, as our interview comes to an end, my final question to you is this, in a sense: what do you feel like? Everyone keeps saying, "Oh, AI is going to come; it's going to steal our jobs." On one side, but AI is already here. It's already working in most industries, and it's already creating disruption all around the world and in all spaces. And it's been here for years already. What do you think is one thing you wish people thought about more when they think of AI? Or one more thing that you wish people
we hear a lot about AI replacing jobs, but in fact, AI does not replace jobs. AI replaces tasks. So we take over particular tasks within a particular job occupation profile. You might have 100 different tasks you have to cover, and over time, AI will probably be taking over many of them. At some point, for some particular jobs, there might be so many that essentially there's no job anymore, or that the nature of the job is completely transformed by technology. Now, I think there's a lot of cause for optimism, right? So if you look at previous waves of technological revolutions, like the electric engine, the steam engine, or the internal combustion engine. So these are things that and the computer too created a lot more jobs than they destroyed in the long run. And I believe that probably the same is going to happen again with AI. However, there is usually in this huge technological transformation, they tend to be conjunctures. There are periods that can be quite extended, that can even run into the decades, where the society has to adjust. And the adjustment can be very painful. So I think it is very important that we have social policies and we have instruments to facilitate that adjustment. Because a lot of the instability that we see around the world, I think, in terms of, for example, democratic societies becoming more strained, more polarized, a lot of it actually, I think, does come down to the impact of technology. And I think to have smart policy making that help us navigate this transition is going to be crucial. I think for people to think about AI is a great thing. It's actually, you know what, if we are going to get out of the trouble that we're in, takes climate change, the only way that we're going to do that is not by going down back to the Stone Age. We can only innovate out of trouble. So we are only going to be able to solve these issues by innovating out of them. So we need more of it, not less of it. But we need to be smart about it and understand what policies are supported. So we need to invest more and more in education, for example, to make sure that our workforce is able to work with algorithms. You should be able to collaborate to be productive with the algorithm rather than be replaced by the algorithm. And for that, you need a lot of know-how. Also, we need to keep investing in further education. There will be a lot of people that need to retrain and reskill. We can no longer go to university, acquire a stock of knowledge, and hope to milk it for 40 years in your career. Like it used to be. You went to school, you learn accounting, then you become an accountant. For 40 years, you keep doing the same thing almost. Not going to happen. So we'll all be reinventing our professions and our skill set every 10 years or so. So we need to have universities and education systems that enable that going back to school kind of trajectory, which we are not designed for. We train young people, they go off, and that's it. Maybe they come back for an MBA or executive education, maybe they come back as alumni, but essentially our job is done, and we need to change that mindset. The job is not done. We need to retrain these people over and over again. Taxation, for example, there are a lot of discussion around topics like universal basic income. How do we create an inclusive society when there is so much force that leads to inequality? Technology has this tendency to create winners and losers. So inequality is always increasing at a time of technological disruption. And we are seeing that today. How do we mitigate it and facilitate that so that we can have a stable democratic society, for example? These are important questions and obviously are not for me to answer. All I can do is to try to understand the individuals' reactions and psychology around autonomous technology and try to provide some insight and might be able to provide input or guidance for some policy-making decisions, but that's for others to do. But there's a lot to do. So.
I think one interview does not do you justice. I think we need a few at least to capture all of the insight and the things that you're talking about, because these are big questions that I think the world is struggling to tackle. And I really appreciate how you've essentially brought them out in such a nuanced and yet hopeful manner. In a sense, I think we need more people like you to help us be in the right frame of mind, at the very least, to innovate out of the things that we are in, as you said. And I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. And I can definitely tell that this is going to be an episode that blows the minds of our audience, and because it's at least given me a lot to think about, that I'm very grateful for. So thank you so much for being on the show. I had lots of fun talking to you and getting myself, I would say, absorbed in your questions and your responses. So thank you so much for doing this. And I only hope that you had a fraction of the amount of fun that I had listening to you, in a sense.
Well, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope to maybe meet you on campus after the summer.
I agree, and I'm sure our audience agrees as well. So thank you so much. As I said, wouldn't be crazy if they didn't have you on board. And to our audience, in a sense, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you listening in as well for today's episode of Changing Reality. And if you enjoyed today's show, please show our beloved professor some love. Like, comment, tell us how you felt from today's episode. And until then, we'll see you again next Thursday at the same time. Bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.